Greetings, lovers of lore. I'm your host for today, Original Orchid, and today we'll be doing a book review on the ever so famous book, What Everybody Is Saying, written by Joe Navarro. So before we get into it, of course, a few disclaimers that this information does not belong to us, but the amazing Joe Navarro, which definitely go read his book, What Everybody Is Saying, because guys, he's a literal ex-FBI agent. His job was to just understand their body language and figure out these suspects, like in this murder case or a street case or whatever. He was with the FBI, so of course, as you can imagine, he's clearly very knowledgeable about the subject. Now let's get right in. So the book begins with him and his colleagues interrogating a possible suspect, however, not a major one, for a murder case. And this person's alibi seemed very sincere to them. However, the agent working with the author pressed on, asking questions such as, if you had committed this case, would you have used a gun? If you had committed this case, would you have used a hammer, etc.? And of course, he understood that the person isn't actually going to confess if they've done it. However, this wasn't his intention. The agent then continues to discuss how one of the weapons, an ice pick, had been used in the crime. And then he asks, if you had committed this case, would you have used an ice pick? This information was information the public wasn't aware of. Thus, only the murderer would know which object was used. The agent continued to list weapons one by one and observed the suspect's body language. When the agent mentioned the ice pick to the suspect is described to have had his eyelids come down hard, which stayed down till the next weapon was named. The agent, knowing the significance of eyelid behavior and what they can mean, even such a quick eyelid behavior as his eyelids coming down quickly, decided to move this suspect from being a minor one to what's described in the book as the primary person of interest in the inspection. This person afterwards confessed that it was he who did it. The book then starts describing Joe Navarro, the author of the novel, and calls him, quote-unquote, one of the master spies during his 35 years with the FBI, and states that if you asked him how he achieved this, he would just say quietly, I owe it all to being able to read people. As he spent his entire professional life, studying nonverbal communication, which includes facial expressions, gestures, body language, distance, and more. He then continues to list his impressive qualities, such as, of course, being in the FBI, being interviewed regularly for programs such as NBS and CNN, his consulting to banking and insurance at major law firms in the US, and his teaching at various med schools across the United States of America, likely to convince readers why they should read this book, his book, versus other body language novels. And then goes on to solidify this with some background information about him, in which he gets into how he adapted body language, and how he began reading body language, something he never planned. However, when his family immigrated to the United States as an exile from Cuba after the Bay of Pigs invasion a few months afterwards, he was unable to speak English. So at first, he learned to be aware of the nonverbal behavior around him, to answer simple queries like, does this person like me? How do my teachers feel about me in order to fit in? So of course, after all that, I took the bait and bought the book after my free trial on Kindle. And now, as you may be wondering, was this book worth it? Definitely. It's one of those books I'd say, while it may take you a while to fully grasp, and you're definitely going to end up rereading certain lines, because it's just not going to make sense, because we don't know anything about body language. At least I didn't. It's eye-opening, to say the least, and necessary to understand the world around you. While you may not become a quote-unquote master spy like Joe, there's a lot to take from it, and a lot you can implement into your own life. So, let's review some of the things you can take from this book. First and foremost, let's talk about what nonverbal communication is. As quoted directly from the novel, which Joe Navarro cites from Burgon, 1994, and it seems to be on pages 229 to 285 in Burgon's book. And nonverbal communication is described here as nonverbal communication, often referred to as nonverbal behavior or body language, is a means of transmitting information, just like the spoken word, except it is achieved through facial expressions, gestures, touching, haptics, physical movements, kinesics, posture, body adornment such as clothes, jewelry, hairstyles, tattoos, etc., and even the tone, timbre, and volume of an individual's voice, rather than spoken context. Nonverbal behaviors comprise approximately from 60 to 65% of all interpersonal communication, and during lovemaking, can constitute to be 100% of communication between partners. Nonverbals are sometimes, quote ended by the way, nonverbals are sometimes also called tells, because they tell us about someone's inner thoughts, true intentions, and basically can give you a glimpse into somebody's mind, depicted from that 60 to 65% approx of what we're thinking is shown through our body language rather than our words. Now that we understand this, we can start taking and reviewing some of the helpful information from this book, starting with the 10 Commandments for taking notice of nonverbal communications and decoding. The first commandment, perhaps the most basic one, is being a competent observer to your environment. While maybe incredibly basic, it's one of the most fundamental for anybody looking to indulge into more body language and understanding it. Basically, and this one's quite simple, what this one states is, as Joe Navarro quotes Dr. Watson from Sherlock Holmes, you see, but you do not observe. We're surrounded our entire lives with people, and we can't control our body language. At least 60% of what we're thinking, we're not saying, we're showing on our body. So of course, if it's this important, and we're surrounded by people our entire lives, why don't we instinctively get body language and nonverbal tells? Easy. We just look. But we don't look to the full extent. We don't observe. When you look at somebody, you don't try to take in every single detail actively. For example, when we talk to somebody, we don't pay attention to the little details in somebody's hand movements. We look at them, we hear what they're saying, and we are looking at them. We're just not paying attention. Thus, if you want to learn to understand nonverbal communication, your first and foremost step is to look around you, and not just look with your eyes, but take each little detail into your mind, and really ask, why is their foot slightly moving this way? Why are they suddenly blinking a bit faster? Why has their torso moved? Etc. The second is observing context. One of the examples Joe gives to describe this is after a car accident, in which you expect people to be shocked, perhaps even scared. Taking this into context, Joe explains that because of these feelings, based on the context, we expect people to make poor decisions, like walking onto traffic, or not seeing where they're going. Thirdly, learning to recognize and decode nonverbal behaviors that are universally found. After you begin to notice people more carefully, you come to realize that across the world, there are certain behaviors most people exhibit during similar situations. For example, lip pursing. Joe used this universal tell once when a client and one of his clients were doing business with somebody else in Britain, I believe. When he noticed the person his client was doing business with pursed his lips at a particular topic, very, very briefly, perhaps even unnoticeable if you're not truly paying attention and asking why this person is doing every little thing that they're doing with their body. However, Joe, being trained to do this, noticed this and slipped a note to his client, warning the client that the person he was doing business with was clearly indicating that something about the clause they just discussed was clearly not to their liking. By doing this, he ended up saving his client about $13.5 million. A lot of money, I know. Fourthly, recognizing and decoding idiosyncratic nonverbal behaviors. Idiosyncratic behaviors are body cues which are unique to an individual. These body cues are ones you should always look out for in order to identify which body cues are unique to them. The longer you've interacted with an individual, the more this will get easier. An example of this that came to my mind while outlining this episode is Mia from the Princess Diaries series by Megan Cabot, something I read years ago and highly recommend, by the way. But basically, in the series, her best friend Lily picks up that whenever Mia lies, her nostrils flare. An idiosyncratic nonverbal behavior she picked up after being friends with Mia for so long. Simple things that all of us have, or at least most of us. For example, one of my idiosyncratic behaviors is that since I'm double jointed, sometimes one of my joints will sort of move a little bit, or not the joint exactly, but sort of the finger. And that usually happens whenever I'm thinking really hard about something. Without my knowledge, it just happens, which is something I noticed after reading this book and sort of analyzing my own behaviors. Fifth, when interacting with people, establishing their baseline behaviors, including noting down how they normally sit, where they place their hands, their posture, the usual position of the feet. The list goes on. And you being able to know the difference between their usual face and their face when they're stressed or annoyed on their faces in everything and anything lying in that ballpark is incredibly important. This is one where I'd especially urge you to read the book because it includes pictures on what to look for. Super helpful, by the way. And as the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. 6. Watch for clusters of tells. Tells often come in clusters, so someone having multiple tells for a specific thing is a huge hint. And if you can pick up on that, your accuracy will increase dramatically if you can find multiple tells. Thus, you can use them sort of like a checklist. This person usually does X, Y, and Z when they're angry. Are they exhibiting X right now? Yes. Are they exhibiting Y right now? Yes. Are they exhibiting Z right now? Yes. They might be angry. 7th. Similar to some of the earlier ones, look for tells that signal changes in emotion, making sure to not just look, of course, but look with your mind and analyze every detail, even the slightest. 8th. Another similar one. Learn to detect misleading nonverbal signals in order to make sure you're not misled. This is elaborated in chapters later on detecting subtle differences in someone's actions in order to figure out, is this particular behavior honest? Thus, you can read them more correctly. The first sign of discomfort is the aroused limbic brain, which is activated when we don't like what we're experiencing, seeing, or hearing, or having to talk about things we'd prefer to keep hidden. Because of this, people usually keep distance between themselves and the people they're speaking to when they're lying to them. And as a result, people who are lying generally don't engage in physical interaction, such as slight touches. Interactions that we generally do without thinking, of course, pre-pandemic. And not just the people they're talking to, but many times they also distance themselves from the objects around them. Joe Navarro talks about how he's never actually seen someone be like, I didn't do it, and slam their fist on the desk. Because we just don't do that. Our limbic brain prefers to sort of distance ourselves. So of course, when we're distancing ourselves from people, we're also distancing ourselves from the objects around us. 9. Distinguishing tells between comfort and discomfort. Pretty simple. 10th, the final one of these commandments, is that when observing someone for tells, be very subtle about it. Perhaps the most obvious one, because how would you feel if somebody was just staring at you for like 6 minutes without really looking at anything else or saying anything? Just staring? You'd probably be pretty creeped out, and that would probably influence your body language. Plus, the person who's trying to tell what your body language is would probably get misled and confused. And if you're on the side of that confusion, it's not going to be helpful for you at all. So, don't look at a specific part of somebody's body for too long. Don't say anything too odd. Just be normal. Learn to observe when you normally look at people throughout your day. We're looking at people 24/7. We're interacting with people very frequently. You're not staring at them, right? When you're talking to them? No. So just as you're looking at them when you're talking to them, use that time, and rather than just looking at them, analyze. Trust me, this one gets better the longer you do it. And so we have the 10 Commandments, which, in my opinion, are the most important ideas, even if perhaps the most fundamental and basic. Joe goes into the body language cues of each body part, including nonverbals of arms, torsos, legs, hands, and of course the face. However, since we don't have the time to go into each detail of the 272 pages in the book, nor can we explain a lot of them, which is why I highly recommend you read the book. Regarding this, I'll explain the cues he states for the 12 tells for the feet that are described by Joe to be the most accurate tells. So it seems like a great place to start to not only leave you with some clues and cues you can pay attention for, but also leave you with an interest to read the book. Now, let's get into nonverbals of feet and the legs. First, happy feet. When someone bounces or wiggles in their feet, it may indicate excitement or satisfaction or happiness. However, it should be noted that this behavior can also indicate impatience, so you should do as the commandments say and take this depending on context. Even while sitting, this movement will show up in their torso or shoulders. 2. Feet shifting direction. You'll often find yourself turning your feet away from things you don't want or like. People usually control the direction of their head and torso. For example, if you're talking to someone, your head and torso is probably facing that person. However, we don't really keep mind of our feet, and our feet seem to have a mind of their own. So we don't really control the direction our feet are pointed at. So even if the rest of somebody's body you're talking to is facing you, pay attention to what direction their feet are pointing. If their feet are pointing away from you, they may not want to associate or talk with you at the moment. You can implement this into your life when you approach someone and aren't sure if they really want to be speaking to you at that moment. If you were already talking to someone and their foot turns away, they may not like what you just said, or they simply may be busy at the moment or cannot speak to you right now. Again, the second commandment, context, is of utmost importance in these situations to figure out if someone's not liking what you're saying or simply may be busy at the moment and can't talk to you or just doesn't feel like talking to you at the moment. Third, the knee clasp. Usually when a person is sitting with both hands on their knees, often also shifting their weight forward, they're ready to leave. Fourth, gravity-defying behaviors. These behaviors indicate happiness or excitement and include pointing one foot up when standing, or simply sitting or standing a little taller. The quote-unquote starter's position, where someone lifts his or her or their heel, may indicate interest or increased engagement, or a readiness to go. An example of this is portrayed in one of the photos that Joe displays in the book, in this chapter, in which the person in this particular photo is in a very good mood, and their toes are slightly lifted up. 5. The leg splay. This is a territorial display. in which you spread your feet in an effort to establish control of the situation. If you want to diffuse the situation and notice you are standing in this manner, bring your feet a little closer together. 6. Standing leg cross. This is the opposite of the leg splay, and this is when you cross your legs while standing. This accentuates the idea that you are very comfortable, and subconsciously do not anticipate an upcoming need to run or leave. Crossing your legs when standing is a great way to put someone else at ease as well. Joe makes it a point to note that people usually cross their legs so they tilt them in the direction of the person who makes them the most comfortable at the moment. So, by the way, in case you're thinking of some weird position when hearing the standing leg crossing like I did, don't worry. It's actually a pose you see a lot. Google it if you'd like to see it. But it's when one leg is diagonally positioned in front of the other leg. Not some weird position where somebody's hunched and their legs are just straddled upon each other. 7. The seated foot movement. At least shocking to me because I do it all the time. But basically this communicates, notice me. The example the author uses is of someone playing with her shoelace or fake tying it. Comment down below if you've done this a million times like I have and can totally relate, or can totally relate to any of these. But I have to admit, until I read these, I was pretty ignorant to most of these until I started reading psych and body language books. 8. The seated leg cross. The direction of the leg cross often indicates if a person likes what you or what you're saying. If the inside of the knee is facing you, they probably like you or what you're saying. However, if the inside of the knee is facing away, they probably don't. Proximity. Also falling under the category of nonverbal foot and leg communication is the distance that people keep between each other. Of course, everyone has his or her or their own comfort level, personal space. However, when someone steps closer or further away, it gives you a clue about their feelings, which correlates to what we're talking about. And what we were talking about earlier when the author stated that liars usually keep their distance and don't engage in the normal physical interactions. Number 10. Walking style. According to the author, there are about 40 different styles of walking. It's a shift in behavior that gives you a clue to how someone is feeling. 11. The foot freeze. If someone's been constantly wiggling or moving their foot or leg and then stops, or if someone has been not moving their leg has been staying stationary, and suddenly their leg starts to move, they may be experiencing stress or another emotional change. 12. The footlock. When a person suddenly interlocks his feet when sitting, it's an indicator of discomfort. The extreme case of this behavior is when someone interlocks both feet with the legs of the chair. So, there you have it. You've officially gotten a preview into an ex-FBI agent's mind. You've learned the 10 commandments in order to succeed with nonverbal communication, and 12 telltale signs of body language and tells through the feet and the legs. Thank you for listening to this week's installment of the Whimsical Whispers Podcast, and in case you're wondering, yes, 5 out of 5 stars. I love this book so much. Definitely go check out Joe Navarro, and several of his other books and works as well, by the way, and some of his recordings on places such as NBC and CNN, because he's a wonderful speaker. And of course, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. We'll see you next week.